First of all, how many people here have not been in an institution, in a correctional institution? Okay, good. Well, so the pictures you saw and the mental pictures that Joel provided us with are examples. The other contrast to these crowded rooms are concrete closets with a metal door, metal toilet, and a little slot where the food tray goes in and out, and you stay in there 20 hours a day. Sometimes by yourself, sometimes with one other person. And so the community in which inmates find themselves is really varies from place to place. But if you think of many of the things that Joel was talking about, this is not all that different from inner city schools in parts of our country. And so these kinds of chaotic communities and mental atmospheres are not unfamiliar to us. And that is and for the person who finds himself there, it is just another slice of the life that they've been living. So the chaos and violence of their own world is maybe reflected in some ways inside. It is a place where we're expecting people to correct themselves, and we give them a little bit of help to do that, but mostly it's not successful. And so prison ministry is a really important supply for all people who are in the correctional institutions, whether people are trying to bring really spiritual values to help people find the stillness within them, which is within them, and whether it's presented as the compassion of the Buddha, or the order and obedience of the Jew, or the peace of Allah, or the love of Christ. It's meant to help people remember. And so when we are there, that's our specific role, really, is to help people remember. And when they do, they find that the solution to these various problems is coming from within them. So today, starting now, I think we're going to hear some examples of the experiences of our chaplains and other members who have different kinds of roles in the institutional work, and it's meant to be kind of a nice invitation to all of you to come and join.
As much for me as I hope my committee and also the inmates that I have serviced through the years by going in and reading a service. I have to say that the thought of fear never really entered my mind. I love Joel's comment that we need to be loving everyone. And so as Christian Zionists, we're really put to the task of seeing that child of God. And that's all we're seeing. And so there's no place for fear. So that concept, that understanding, that view of man is what we need to carry forward. After being a worker for a while, I then became a liaison to the San Mateo County Service League. And the San Mateo County Service League is the umbrella, the door that we must walk through in our county in order to get into the jails. So we have a wonderful director, religious services director, Mike Murray, who is serving now, and we have a wonderful rapport with the staff at the Service League. It hasn't always been there, but just a couple of other things that Joel talked about was love and patience and expectancy from our committee, staying patient and persistent in the work. We have really a very lovely relationship, partnership with our Service League people. Mike Murray, let me go back just a step. If you want to be a worker, you need to go through your local committee first. You need to be interviewed, you need to read the procedure handbook, and you need to work through your local committee. Once you have been approved at that level, then the next step is to go to, in our case, the Service League, and there's an orientation meeting that Mike Murray takes the people through. And he's wonderful. Sometimes he does it in groups, but if we have a new person who's wanting to jump on board before his next scheduled orientation meeting, he will actually do a one-to-one with that person to get them serving in the jail much sooner. So once we've been through that orientation meeting, the next step then would be to be cleared. All our application would be looked at and cleared through the Service League. And then when you get that phone call that says, you can go have a photo, that's a really important day, because you make an appointment with Renee and you go in on a Monday morning during certain hours and you are given your photo and you walk out that day with your badge. You are ready to serve. And usually your badge will tell you what institutions you are allowed to go into. We have a women's facility and the men's facility, two of them, and so it will usually say on your badge what facility you're allowed to go into. Your badge needs to be renewed every 2 years. So this is good. You go through kind of a renewal with your local committee. They kind of ask you questions, what's working for you, what's not. And then, like I say, you finally get your badge and you're ready to go in. So this is a very easy process, but it needs to be followed because there is your protection and your safety along the way in following the correct steps. Our Service League is wonderful in the sense that we do other programs that San Mateo County is doing are very vital to the community. When I go to quarterly service meetings for the Service League, we have an agenda, and all the prison ministries that go into the jail are represented at these meetings. And we discuss how things are going, how many people, men and women, are in attendance at the meetings. We go through statistic kind of things. Then we also talk about new programs coming into the jail. We also talk about things that are happening and challenges and how we can work together to get through the times that we're facing. We also have a mentoring program in San Mateo, which I can talk to any of you about if you're interested. We also have a Christmas program. I think you mentioned Angel Tree. And San Mateo does do a holiday thing where the inmates, their children, the men and women's jail all have some kind of a holiday celebration. Our particular church at Menlo Park actually does a cookie train party where we can jump in and make cookies, decorate them, and take them to the jail so that we can go in on Christmas morning. And the men are presented with a bag with fruit, cookies, a card decorated by the children and whatnot, so that they're feeling a part of the holiday even though they can't be home with their families. I need to go on to the next person. So, D. Kari, I'm sorry. A question?
Yeah. So is San Mateo the only county that has this? Because this is the first I've ever heard of this league.
The Service League. And I don't know what the other doors, Pat, are that go through.
Every institution, every county, every place is different.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
And I'm just speaking to specifically what has worked where I'm serving. So D or Kari, you can come up next, and go ahead, Kari.
I started about a year ago, and I had experience in my work history in the past working with nonprofit businesses, employing people who were formerly incarcerated in jail. And so I had experiences working with folks that came from some of this background, but not any experience going directly into the jails. And my work has been as what we've called a worker, so going in once a month and reading doing a service with a partner. So currently Robin and I go in once a month into the men's jail in San Mateo County. And I have been really touched in the last year at just the receptivity and the sincere thirst for truth that I've really felt from the men that I've been working with and seeing over the last year. And I've also been really touched. I felt like I've done a lot of things as a member of a church, Sunday school teacher, and working in different parts of the church and coming into the institutional committee. So our county comes together from multiple churches around the county, and I've been really inspired by the other individuals, and just to see the level of dedication and thought and time and contribution has been really inspiring to me from these other members. But I just wanted to share briefly a few kind of preconceived notions that I had before going into this work that have been adjusted and changed for me. And one big one was that jail is a depressing and sad place. And although we certainly have seen today and talked today about some of the physical and mental challenges that are there, and I don't mean to swipe over it with sort of a Pollyanna attitude, but I have been really struck every time by the kindness and the laughter and the love from the men in the services that we have. Sometimes we'll have 4 or 5 men, sometimes we'll have 15, but the kindness, whether it's the gentleman setting up the chairs or looking out for each other and handing each other materials, and the laughter, there's just a different sense of love and light than I would have expected. So I've been very grateful at that sense, and I feel like I leave every service happier and lighter, and that's not something I might have thought going into this work. The other preconceived notion I had was that Christian Science lessons are too difficult and boring for this audience. I mean, our Bible and our Science and Health is full of big words and pretty deep, hard concepts, and I was really worried of, are people going to get this? And I know a lot of individuals, highly educated individuals who struggle to stay alert and awake during a Christian Science service and understand it. And some of the times as I'm reading, I'm thinking, are people getting this or not? And there was one time that, in our traditional service, we have a time for collection. So often in our reading during that collection moment of the service, we'll just go around and collect gratitude from people. And I was just amazed by the depth and complexity to the questions that people would ask, and whether it's about good versus evil or beliefs about the Trinity, or really getting the deep aspects of the lesson that we just read. So I've been really impressed with that. Kind of, for me, removing that sense of saying someone has to be limited, they might not have the education or understand this vocabulary, and really knowing that depth is getting to them and touching them in a special way. The third one was more basic, of just that I'm going there to give, and that was my notion, and really feeling that I'm actually getting more than I'm giving. So I have found this work to be much more rewarding than I might have thought going into it, and much more inspiring to me, and helping me dig deeper as I prep for going into a service and giving me an opportunity. So I hope to share this more with folks in our church and other branches, and encourage others to get into this work, and that it is something that can be deeply touching to us, and things that we can get out of it as individuals as well.
Monday morning is when I go to the jail to see the people who've requested to see a chaplain. Well, I went there, and he was invited as his turn came up. And he's on the upper tier, and he comes bouncing down in his lively, feisty self, and I thought, oh. And so then I said, now stop it, Dee. God's man is here. This is who this is. This is one of God's guys. Come on. And I thought, all right, he's joyous. And he was. He couldn't wait to get to me, and he said, I got to tell you something. And right away this little shadow came and said, oh, what's he going to tell me now? And he said, I just got to tell you this. He said, last night, I left the service, and I went into my cell, and I flipped on the light. And my cellie, who was on the upper bunk, jumped out, his fist ready to just bash me, and he was calling me every name in the book. And he said, nobody calls me anything but by my name. And he said, I usually take them out. He says, I'm pretty good at it. I've done it all my life. So I thought, oh. And then he proceeded to say, his cellie said, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I was asleep. You startled me. And he said, my fist was ready to just take him out. And he said, suddenly, I remembered that peace that I felt in that church service. And I didn't take him out. I just told him, it's okay, go back to bed. Now, to me, that was a direct demonstration of what the church service does for the inmates. And it's one of many incidents, but I relate that because it's the most recent one. And I'm grateful for the work. And I'm grateful that this guy did this because it pushed me to look beyond the physical attitude or physical appearance. So, I'm grateful for the work.
It's made his life blossom in that environment. Before he found Christian Science, he has been studying it probably for about 3 to 4 years. Before he had that, he was really lost. He was having behavioral issues and just depression, and by his continual faithful study and work with various chaplains, not only ourselves but with other ones that he's worked with in the institutions, he has now become a beacon for us fellow inmates who then come to him, and he ministers to them, and he helps them understand the Bible, and he offers them science and health. And he's recently, last year, he joined the Mother Church. And then he was asking about taking class instruction. And we thought, I'm not sure we can do that here. But, let's expect to be moving beyond the institutions and maybe address that when he gets out of prison. And so I just wanted to express, how much this work is needed in fulfilling, of course, one of the great commandments of loving our neighbor as ourselves.
I'll just give you a little flavor about what I do as a chaplain. I've given services in the past. I'm pretty busy with my regular life, and so it's kind of hard to put the service together. A lot of times there's some paperwork that has to be filled out. It takes a lot of time up. And what I found is that the inmates really want to meet with you one-to-one, because that's when you can really get down and work with them, whatever issues are bothering them. And of course, my role there is to help them with their spiritual growth. That's my whole role, and teach them to lean on God, not on me, not on any other thing. So I found that the one-to-ones are great, and as Joel talked about, cell friends. I usually get to the prison after I teach Sunday school. I'm usually there at over the noon hour, and I don't get out of there until 8 o'clock at night. And I'll see anywhere from 20 to 30 guys. And I spend literally that whole time talking through a crack about that white. So I'm going like this all the time, and I've got the Bible and the Science and Health, and I'm reading. And what I do is I make the rounds not too different from what a doctor does. I've got a briefcase, and I've got Bible lessons in there. I've got the ones they can read, they've got the CDs, the ones that they can listen to, and also have Sentinels. That's pretty much all the room I have in this bag, because they won't let you take a real big bag in. And so I'll make my rounds, and I'll see that many people during my afternoon and into the evening. And what I usually do is I pick something out of the Bible lesson that is, it just comes to me, that would be appropriate. And oftentimes what I find is that that short thing that I shared from the Bible lesson, I call it the word for the day. I'll call it, and I'll pull up to the cell front, and we'll say hello and chat for just a second or two, and then I say, are you ready to listen to the word for the day? In fact, they usually beat me to it and say, hey, chaplain, what's the word for the day? And so I'll read the word for the day to them, and oftentimes, so many times, they'll tell me, that's exactly what I needed to hear today. That's exactly what I needed to hear. So that's kind of how my day flows. I go through in Simi Valley State Prison. We have 4 different yards that I deal with, and lots of inmates. Oftentimes I have to wear a bulletproof vest because I go into some of the facilities where they've got administrative segregation, where they've got inmates that could be that are a problem, a bit of a problem, so they want you to be protected. Or sometimes even I've worn the riot masks and met with them in small cages. But that doesn't deter the message. It really doesn't deter the message. Let's see what I can. I'm going to start off here and tell you one comment that I remembered when I first started. I met with this one inmate and at his cell front, and I remember reading a short passage from the Bible and the Science and Health, and I don't even remember what it was, but all I can remember is this one thing that he said. He'd been down for 30 years, and his cell was real dark all the time. And I remember him telling me, he said, "Chaplain, if I'd known this when I was a kid on the streets, I would not be in here." That really set the tone for me, and I just realized how important the work is. And even if you don't see the change happening, the change is happening. And I remember my very first orientation. We got through the whole thing, and me and another fellow was with me, and we were at the other prison actually, and we went to the church service on Sunday because that's when the orientation was, and so I forget, it's a Protestant service, and there must have been 200 guys, and there was a huge chapel at the Soledad prison. I remember after it was over with, we were standing around, and some of the inmates were coming up and talking to us, and this idea that Joel talks about, you have to love everyone that you see when you're in the prison, doesn't matter who it is. And so this one inmate came up to me, and I hadn't even started as a chaplain. He came up to me, and he asked me what we were doing there and what I was. I told him I'm a Christian Science chaplain. Immediately, he launched into a tirade. He just was chewing me up and down one side and the next. "You Christian Scientists, your cult, your devil worshipers, and Mary Baker Eddy, blah, 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 blah." This went on for 2 minutes straight. And I'm sitting there, I'm standing there listening to him, and I realized, okay, I've got to pray and see this man as God's child, and I did. I refused to let this impose itself on my thinking, and instead see him just exactly the way God sees him, the way he's always been. And so this 2 minutes seemed like eternity. And so I was praying, and he's just chewing me out. Suddenly, boom, he stopped, just like that. And his face was taut, had been taut, and he was just he was frowning, and all of a sudden it just relaxed. He just relaxed, and he said, "Chaplain, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it coming." Shook my hand. Yeah, you bet. I've never seen him since. Okay, so Tim Ames, I think, who was going to CMC. I had an inmate. This is my first one who actually joined as a member of the Mother Church, and I've been meeting with him. Mother Church is our, Joel, for your purposes, it's our affectionate name for our main headquarters back in Boston. He wanted to become a member of the Christian Science Church, and I've been meeting with him for about 3 years, and this particular inmate really found Christian Science compelling, and he would ask me question after question after question. I'd spend an hour sometime at the cell front talking with him, and we had some issues with his family. We worked through prayer, but he really saw the value of Christian Science. He started applying it to himself, and he just realized this old way of thinking just had to go. So I gave him a Bible and the Science and Health, and of course he would read the Bible lessons every week, and then pretty soon he started asking me a lot about Mary Baker Eddy. Did she write anything else, and was there anything else to read? And so I told him about the other writings that she wrote, and I brought him a copy of that, and he loved that. That was great. And then he said, "Do you have a really nice Science and Health?" I said, "Yeah, I've got some. I've got those little small old ones. Used to make the leather ones with kind of gold." And I brought that to him. He thought that was the best thing since sliced bread. He couldn't believe it. And then he said, he was asking me about, well, about the church, and we had talked about the manual. I said, can I get a copy of the manual? Sure, you can have a copy of the manual. So I gave him a copy of that, and he read it, and he loved what he was reading. Now, one of the things he really liked was the Sentinel. And he constantly wrote his family and constantly wrote his wife. And one of the things that was so great about this is he would pull out, rip out the not only the testimonies but the articles out of the Science and out of the Sentinel, and he would send them home to his wife. He'd share them with his wife, and she'd write back, and they'd have these great discussions. And finally, so he told me that his wife started going to the church in the town where they're from, and I think she went to a Wednesday night service, he told me, and she really started seeing these ideas. Well, he's since transferred out and gone to the facility where in the town, close to the town where his wife lives. And to see the transformation in these people was just really wonderful, and how he carried that out to his family. The guy the other day, he said, Chaplain, I've been down 10 years. I just realized, instead of doing the time in prison, I've been letting the time do me. Okay? And he's, after 10 years, okay, now I've only been meeting with this guy probably for, we had a lecture 2 years ago in the prison, and he came to that, and ever since then he's met with me, and he's really started to pick up the ideas. But it takes them a little time sometimes because of the influence of their realm. But the other day he said to me, he said, I did the biggest thing that I've done since I've been, the 10 years that I've been here in prison. I said, well, what is that? He said, I gave up my porn. He said, I'm not a pervert. I don't need it. That's what he said. I just don't need it. I don't need it. Small thing, seemingly a huge thing in their life. Especially when you realize the benchmark that they grew up with. It's a really distorted benchmark that they have in life, and they don't know any. They don't know that there is another way. There's another way of thinking, that there's another view. They really absolutely don't know that. I had an inmate that I met with for, and some of you were at Church Alive at my workshop. You might have heard this one. This is an inmate that I met probably 10 years ago at Salinas Valley, and he was real interested. He liked what he was hearing in Christian Science. Actually, that's when I actually had some services, and so we went usual thing, give him Science and Health and Bible lessons, and he would sort of sporadically look at it, but he wasn't really serious about it. But he still wanted to meet with me, so he was kind of, just kind of playing around on the fringes a little bit with it. So one day I showed up at his cell, and he was really distraught. He was really scared. He was really, really scared. And he said, he told me that he'd just been to the doctors, and they told him that he had this condition of his blood, some sort of cancerous condition, and it was showing up in his blood. And he was really, really scared. And he said, would you help me? And I said, sure. I said, then I asked him, hey, are you willing to do whatever it takes? Because he'd been kind of playing around on the fringe a little bit, right? So he said, yes. I'm willing to do that. I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take that Science and Health, I want you to start with the very first chapter, which is the chapter on prayer, how to pray. And I said, I want you to read it, I want you to read really slow, and when you get through with one sentence, I want you to go to the next one until you've thought about it and see how it applies to you. Okay, and then you can go to the next one. I said, do you understand? Yep, I got it. I said, okay, you do that, and I'll see you in 2 weeks, and I'll pray for you. So I came back in 2 weeks, and there he is at the cell. He's got a smile from ear to ear, right? And he's just overjoyed. And I said, how you doing? I'm doing great. He said, I went back to the doctors, and they said they couldn't find anything wrong with my blood. He said, I'm feeling really great. I said, wow, that's great, terrific. Tell me what happened. Tell me what was going on in your thought. What happened that brought this about? And he said, well, I did just like you told me. I read the chapter on prayer, and I was starting to read and go from one sentence to the next, thinking about it. And he said, I got about 3 or 4 pages into it, and suddenly I just realized how perfect man was. This is like, it was like he said, the way he described it, he says, like my thought just lit up like a light bulb. Just like a light bulb. And he said, I knew I was okay. And I felt, at that moment, he said, I felt so much better. He said he couldn't believe how much better he felt. He said, I saw that perfect man we've talked about. Just for a moment. I said, I wish you could have hung on, but it went away. Yeah, I can wrap it up. Oh, I've got so many more of these. Okay, I'm gonna do this. Something I did at the church live workshop. I'll let one of the inmates tell you the story in his own words. Let's get it here. It just takes a second. Parts that really gets to the heart of the thing, situation. It says, this is a guy who is from Southern California, and he played football. He's a really good football player, and his dad was his coach. So he's been playing football since he was knee-high to an apple core, and he's been playing all his life. He loved it. His dad was his coach. And so, anyways, he said, my dad and I have always had a rocky relationship. Growing up, my dad was very angry and mean. Most of the time, just downright hard to deal with. I had no idea why my dad was such an angry man and why he oftentimes would take his angry feelings out on me and my poor mother. But he did, with actions and words. Then one night, all I can remember is a bunch of police officers coming to my house and dragging my dad out in handcuffs. Shortly after that, my dad was sent to prison for 12 years for a crime he did not do. Needless to say, this did nothing to improve my dad's angry attitude, obviously. For the past 4 years, I've been being ministered to by a Christian Science chaplain. From the very first time we met, the chaplain and I had talked about my dad's rocky relationship on almost every single occasion on our bi-weekly visits. And like a wonderfully broken record, the chaplain would always sum up my feelings about my dad by telling me, in order for me to get the healing I was looking for with my relationship between my dad and I, first I needed to change my thought process and the way I saw my dad. The chaplain would always refer me to my Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures book by Mary Baker Eddy, page 477. You guys all know this. Line 2 and 3, which says, in this perfect man, the Savior saw God's own likeness, and this correct view of man healed the sick. She's explaining how Jesus healed. And so that's what he was referring to. I'll be the first to admit that I did not understand what this statement meant, let alone how to apply it to my situation. But I just prayed on it as the chaplain told me to, and I waited for my healing. About 1 week before New Year's Eve, I made a resolution to no longer hold a grudge against my dad and let go of all the past hurt and anger for good, and I did. Then 3 days before New Year's Eve, I got a letter from my dad, which I had not gotten in over 9 months, saying to call him on New Year's Day, and that he missed me, and that the Texas Longhorns were playing Alabama. And the game was going to be great, which was my dad's way of saying, son, I love you. I called my dad on New Year's Day, and we had the best, most loving conversation we've ever had my entire life. It wasn't until the next day that I realized my prayers had been answered. And I just received my first Christian Science healing. Touching you guys.
That was wonderful, Brian. Thank you.